For. Remember, tonight we are going to be discussing the hits and misses, that is, of the Africa Climate Summit that was held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And of course, with me, I'm going to be having Juliet Oluoch, founder of Ufanisi Research Network, as well as Koaile Monaheng from South Africa, but he'll be on live Zoom from Zanzibar, Tanzania. So we're going to be having this very interesting conversation, and we are going to be talking about what Africa really hopes to gain from this year's COP30. So I'd like to welcome my first guest in studio, Juliet Oluoch, founder of Ufanisi Research Network.
Thank you so much, Shix. Thanks for having me.
How are you today? And how was the Africa Climate Summit to start off with?
Yeah, I mean, this summit was different, to say. At least for the first time, I saw a situation where Africa was not positioning herself as this vulnerable, independent continent.
Okay.
But we were positioning ourselves as drivers of climate innovation and the change that we actually want to see. Aside from that, there were also really commendable deals based off of what we heard from the Nairobi Declaration, which is a step towards the right direction, even as we head towards COP30 in Belém.
In fact, maybe you can break down what exactly the Nairobi Declaration was, and maybe you can analyze it further for people who are watching at home who don't really understand that. So maybe you'd be the right person to break it down for us.
Absolutely. So, of course, the Nairobi Declaration was from the first Africa Climate Summit.
Okay.
The first of its kind gathering where we had different heads of states and Africans coming together to chart a way forward towards COP28 at the time. And so with the Nairobi Declaration, we had several things coming up. For example, there was the need to strengthen our clean cooking, which was a relatively new technology as Africa tries to shift away from, cooking using what we would call unclean technology in layman's language. That's the traditional forms of cooking in Africa. But we also saw initiatives like now building our production of green hydrogen, and also the most contentious issue around the global carbon tax, questions around how to go about this as Africa coming up.
Okay. All right. Now, Juliet, what were some of the highlights for you personally? You have been attending multiple of these summits, and you are quite an active member of the climate, of course, society in the country. You are somebody who has really been involved in COP as well. So maybe you can tell us more about what was your highlight from this particular summit.
For the Africa Climate Summit, number one was the Africa Youth Climate Assembly.
Okay.
I think for that, as a young person and to all young people, that was one of the major highlights, because at least during this summit, we get a chance to give our own declaration, which was luckily adopted from the time it was read. Again, we had some very path-breaking initiatives. For example, the government of Denmark pledging around $79 million to support agricultural transformation, and that for Kenya means a lot. As a country that is hugely dependent on agriculture, then it means we'll be able to get funding support for smallholder farmers, more investments going into climate smart agriculture. The other personal kind of highlight was seeing African financial institutions like the AFDB coming together to sign a landmark cooperation framework that will now operationalize the green, the Africa Green Industrialization Initiative, and this will go alongside the $100 billion that's already mobilized to support renewable energy, resources, and industries into climate smart growth for the continent.
All right. Thank you very much. We'll get back to you, of course, as we continue having this conversation. I'd like to welcome our second guest, and I'm not too sure how to say his first name, so I'm going to allow him to say it because I really do not want to butcher his name. But yes, he's going to be joining us from Zanzibar. So a very warm welcome to you.
Thank you so much, and hello to your listeners, and thank you for having me. Am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. All right, we'd like you to introduce yourself. Please do tell us your names, and maybe you can give us more information about what exactly it is that you do. We understand that you are an African storyteller, you are a consultant, you are a leader, you also have masters in philosophy in climate change and development, and you also were part of the Africa Climate Summit. So I do not want to butcher your name, which is why I'm requesting you to say your name on television.
Thank you so much. So my name is Koaile Monaheng. I'm from the Kingdom of Lesotho, based in Southern Africa. And I'm also the Greenpeace Africa Pan-African political strategist.
All right. Maybe you can tell us more about your thoughts on the Africa Climate Summit to start off this conversation, Koaile.
Thank you so much. So the Africa Climate Summit was the second time it was happening. The last one was in 2023, as the speaker in studio had alluded to. And yes, I mean, Greenpeace, we contributed to the People's Declaration. That was the African People's Just Transition and Climate Development Declaration that came out at the summit. And really our objectives this year was to ensure that climate movement, as well as international allies, do push for bold action on concrete commitments. We also played a strong role in the People Assembly and really engaged civil society, as well as we spoke on a few panels that really included financing renewables for a resilient future. And we drove home the importance of energy and just transition, and really talking about some recommendations around climate finance as well. This is also quite an interesting year, given the fragmented geopolitical context. So the Africa Climate Summit 2 can't be more timely in terms of Africa really coming together. It's an important political moment for the continent to join together in the spirit of Ubuntu, climate diplomacy, and that's what we really saw at the Climate Summit. And our positions included the UN tax convention process, which aimed to establish a fair and inclusive global tax system. Our campaign for making polluters pay, which really seeks to hold fossil fuel corporations and other major polluters accountable financially for the damage they've caused to people, planet, in relation to COP30. And the last one there that also came out in the summit, the Forest Solutions work, which aims to leverage global commitments for financing nature protection that are aligned with channeling finance directly to indigenous peoples and also local communities. And that was really what we went into the Climate Summit with.
All right, thank you very much for that. The one question that a lot of people do want to be answered, of course, I've asked Juliet the same question, but what exactly are we expecting Africa to gain from this year's COP30? What is it that you believe Africa will be taking home from this year's COP30?
So to go back to the point also about the summit, on what really came out strongly, this COP30 speaks to forest work. The Brazilian presidency has stated that they want to deliver strongly on forests. So for the Addis Ababa Declaration to capture the major issue of Africa's role, particularly the Congo Basin forest, in protecting continent from climate breakdown is a very, very progressive and important piece, where Africa wants to commit to a people-centered approach to resilience that recognizes, again, the role of IPs and LCs as local stewards of the environment. The declaration also spoke very strongly on Africa's renewable energy potential, and that really inspired the global beacon for Africa in terms of being the continent that's not a key actor, but is also a global leader in the transition. And there was also some language that came out on the commitment to achieving 300 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity by 2030, which is very ambitious and commendable. That's what the continent is going into COP30 with.
All right, thank you very much for that. I'd like to move over to you, Juliet. Maybe you can also be in a position to answer the same question, and maybe you can tell us what Africa is going to be expecting to gain from this year's much-awaited COP30.
Yeah, I don't want to repeat what
Yes.
is mentioned already, but I would say, number one, also following the Ethiopian declaration that we just had, one of the things that Africa has come up with strongly, like I mentioned, the positioning is different this time. And so I believe we stand a better chance at the negotiation tables based of how we are now moving there with a voice that we can do this. We are actually drivers of change, but we do need, the support from the countries need to come not as normal loans, but in the form of grants, so that African nations can be able to buffer themselves and already adapt to the effects of climate change. So it's a shift in mindset in the way that Africa will present itself at the negotiation table. Yeah.
All right. And you are going to be a part of COP30, of course. In what capacity?
Yeah, so in my capacity as a researcher, of course, I work on a day-to-day basis to generate evidence, which is very important in negotiation tables. And just to mention, Sheikhs, there was a complaint that, not so many things from Africa are getting absorbed in these negotiations. And it's mainly because we do not publish. We are not producing papers that we can then use to support ourselves. So going into COP30 in my capacity as a researcher will be to represent African climate voices with evidence. So it's more of an empowerment, and specifically representing cities, because that's where my research is mainly focused on building urban resilience. So then how can our cities become more resilient? Is there data to support that as well? And also, again, representing the millions of young people. We recently held the local Stocktech, which is like a mini COP that happened in Nairobi. And so we have a bunch of very critical outcomes that we will be presenting as COP30, as Ufanisi Research Africa. And so it's more of a representative role, but also generating the evidence that will then take to the negotiation table.
All right, brilliant. The summit basically centered on nature-based solutions, right? And how exactly can we see that coming into play, particularly in our country, Kenya?
In a number of ways. Number one, when you talk about nature-based solutions, the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, tree planting.
Yes, of course.
And just nature regeneration activities like land reclamation and so forth. Kenya as a country has been doing quite a bit on that. And I'm sure one of the conversations, again, I got this a lot from Addis Ababa, is then, because when we do nature regeneration, then we also bring in the topic of carbon financing and, carbon credits and trading of this. So that's one of the things that is likely to come up in the sense that we are doing this nature regeneration activities and practices like planting trees and so forth. And so how can we leverage that to get some sort of funding in terms of carbon financing? Yeah.
All right. I'd like to take it back to Koaile, who is obviously joining us from Zoom. And my question to you is, what do you think about Ethiopia's climate solutions, and what exactly can Africa as a whole take away from Ethiopia?
I think on that question, I also want to also talk about the what was missed. And what, as a Greenpeace Africa, we hold strongly against, and that is the carbon market schemes. We've seen them come up before at the 2023 Nairobi Africa Climate Summit. They were also present again at the AMSIN negotiations, or the AMSIN this year, and again, they're coming up. And we're very firm on really thinking about the research has spoken to this as well, where carbon markets are seen as for solutions. Rather than reducing global emissions, they allow corporations largely based again in the global north to offset pollution through land grabs in the global south. And even though the declaration spoke quite strongly to committing to a people-centered approach to resilience that centralizes the role of IPs and LCs, this goes against that. So that's a worry there in terms of language. So again, we can't put a price tag on nature and make African communities better burdened. We have to deliver real and fair climate finance, which has been something that's been important, and the NCQG at COP29, the failure to deliver on that. And now what we see is these 4 solutions again coming up into the conversation. And one of the ways that we're also proposing solutions to that is on debt justice, the international tax reform, fixing of the global financial architecture rather, that really came out strongly. But we did, as a continent, during the summit, miss a bold opportunity to restate Africa's position on tax, especially making polluters paying tax in the super rich who've accumulated, as you know, obscene wealth at the expense of people and planet. So we need to hold polluters accountable, because as a continent, we then risk carrying the burdens of climate action.
All right, thank you very much. And of course, I think due to interest of time, we will have to wrap up. But before we do so, we'd like to get your closing remarks. We'll start off with you, Juliet. Maybe you can just, in a nutshell, tell us exactly what your experience was like, what you'd like to say moving on, and yeah, just some takeaways from the summit.
Thank you very much. I started by saying that this Africa Climate Summit felt really different.
Yes.
And that was a highlight for me. There was a shift in mindset where we are thinking of ourselves as drivers of change. And I saw a lot of cooperation from our African leaders, which is something that I think we have been lacking as a continent. Okay. And to see that happening through these Africa Climate Summits means that Africa is taking lead in the climate transformation space. The other thing for me is the spirit of youth and young people in these conferences, the ability to come together regardless of the countries and the locations, the experiences, coming together for a common goal is something that really inspired and motivated me. And going into COP30 in Belém, like my fellow interviewers alluded to, there is discussions going to be around the global goal on adaptation, topics around just transition, which have been contentious for a lot of years, for so many discussions. And so going forward with that cooperative aspect and unity, I think places us at a very good position in negotiations table. So looking forward to COP30 and all that will come from it.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate your time, Juliet. We'd like to move over to Koaile, who is joining us from Zoom, and also get his closing remarks on the same, his highlight from the Africa Climate Summit, some major takeaways, and what he expects moving forward with all these summits. And of course, the fact that now people are attending them actively, there is a lot of interest, especially coming from Africa. So yeah, what are we expecting to see in terms of change moving forward, Koaile?
Thank you so much. I think some closing comments from me center around a just transition, being not only about renewable energy, but also centering around principles of justice and fairness for the continent. And as a continent, we can't finance climate justice. We can't finance our climate justice and our climate future, but continue to leave the root causes of the injustice and challenge. So this is very important for us. And coming out of IDES, we saw African leaders make a very strong international commitment and partnerships to close the finance gap. And that's very important in order for us to achieve the important climate action that the speaker who's joining has spoken about. And those are something that's also very important for us. Africa is warming faster than the rest of the world, and climate change will continue to impact the growth of African economies negatively. So we have to act together. And I also do echo the unity going into COP, but also with African states, they need to also include the importance of civil society and communities and be very people-centered as we approach COP30, because that will be the unity that's real, the unity that can be seen, and the unity that can drive this continent forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That is Koaile Monaheng, who is obviously very much involved in matters climate change and sustainable development. He is a consultant, a leader, an African storyteller, and we really do appreciate your time. We also had Juliet with us. We've spoken to Juliet in the past, and it's always a pleasure speaking to you again. Juliet Oluoch, the founder of Ufanisi Research Network, and it was quite a wholesome discussion on what your experiences were like and what you really took away from this entire experience at the Africa Climate Summit that was held in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. All right, with that, we'd like to move on now to our world.